I'm going to talk a little bit too about what's going on here in the Atlanta Special District. That's 10 counties up here, and you may say, well, I'm not in one of those 10 counties, so how does it pertain to me? And we'll show you how it will pertain to you, because the long tentacles of government will certainly reach out to you. Now, we're going to do this a little bit like Jeopardy. You know, in Jeopardy, you get the answer, and then you've got to come up with a question, right? So in your packet, there is a list of questions in there. I made up about 250. My gosh, I think we've got more than 250 people here, but I've also got the questions up on the screen. Now, why did I do that? We had a couple of people in the audience that said, give me a couple of, bumper sticker kind of quotes that I can ask my elected officials, my Chamber of Commerce, or other influential proponents of the tax referendum. Because I know I'm concerned about it, but just need some specifics. So I've given you some specifics in there. The purpose of the Transportation Investment Act is spelled out in 2 sections, and those are the 2 stated purposes. Now, they sound pretty good in there on their surface. And keep those 2 purposes in mind as we look at the projects around the state and we look at the funding around the state, and see if you think that it supports the projects that the legislators approved. First question then, what constitutes a public interest? And how do you know whether it's a public interest or a special interest used in the name of public interest? Well, interestingly, economists have answered that question for us, and they've identified 2 criteria to determine whether it's really in the general welfare or public interest or not, as opposed to being a special interest. The first of those is that there is no reasonable way to exclude any citizen from that product or service. And the second criteria is that if it's applied to one group or area, you don't diminish its ability to any other group or area. One example is national defense. That is truly in the general welfare of all United States citizens. And if I provide national defense to protect Georgia, there's no way I can really exclude it from neighboring Alabama, Florida, or South Carolina. So it passes the first one of those criteria. The second criteria, if I provide it to Georgia, I'm not diminishing the amount of national defense that's available to Oklahoma. Now let's look at transit. And transit is a big budget item in the TIA, certainly here in the 10-county Atlanta Metro District, but as you'll see, it's a big portion of the entire state effort. Is there a reasonable way to exclude people from using MARTA? Absolutely, it's the Breeze card. You pay $250. If you've got one, you can get on. If you don't have one, you're excluded. Once you get onto MARTA and you occupy a seat, you are reducing the availability of that resource for the length of your trip. So that is not in the public interest, it is the special interest of those riders. All right, that's our first question. Let's look at some of the TIA outcomes. The legislation established the RTR, or Regional Transportation Roundtable. That was a group of 21 mayors, the mayor of Atlanta, and the chair of each one of the county commissions in the 10 counties. And they voted on a list of about 150 projects here in our metro region. They did it in your regions as well. The Georgia government will ask us all whether we want to tax ourselves by an additional penny sales tax on July 31st. If we do, it will go for 10 years minimally. And going from 6 cents to 7 cents down in Fayette County is a little better than a 15% increase in my taxes. And it's going for 10 years. There are several outcomes. One, it could be defeated. And when we do the vote will be done within each one of those districts. I'm most familiar with the Atlanta Metro District, and it's 10 counties. So if you look at all the people that go to the poll, and 50% plus one vote to approve it, then every county is required to participate. So I, down in Fayette County, could have every one of our 65,000 voters turn it down, and if 50% of the region plus one voted for it, then we will be paying the tax for the next 10 years. Now that begins to talk about home rule in our Georgia Constitution. There is currently no opt-out provision, although Representative Setzler has said that that's one of the fatal flaws, and that should be corrected in this legislative session. So more to follow. Now, if it's passed, then it'll go for at least 10 years, and there's some incentives and punishments in there. You can see that there's a local match of 30% for local jurisdictions on road project improvements and maintenance. But if they get their citizens to vote for it, then that match rate drops to 10%. Well, what is it now? Well, it depends on what county you're in, and it depends on what the specific project is and how much funding may be available. I checked with our county engineer, and he said, Bob, for talking purposes, it's about 20%. So this thing is structured so there's a penalty of 10% and a carrot dangling out there of 10%. Again, it's kind of controlling decisions through the use of funding. Now, there is a provision in there if something happens which is rarely, if ever, happened in government before. And that is that the amount of money collected exceeds the cost of the projects. If that were to happen, then they would stop collecting the money. Georgia 400, ring any bells? All right, now there is a provision in there to reimpose the 10-year period. And that can go on for as many 10-year periods as possible. And there is a great concern that we're going to create a too-big-to-fail system and have to do it because people will say, Bob, the track's already down. The stations are built. The cars are coming in. The unions are ready to employ more people. We've got to extend it. So we talked to a few legislators, and this was their response. All right, a couple of key provisions in here. Let's talk about this thing because it applies across the state. The project list, as we mentioned, should target those two TIA purposes of essential public interest. That was one of them. What was the other one? Gridlock. Get rid of all that nasty traffic around Atlanta. When we go through it, you be the judge as to whether the projects make a meaningful contribution to those two goals. Then there is the matter of paying for it, and that's the tax referendum. And as we mentioned, if it's passed, all counties within each one of the 12 special districts will have to participate.